Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. We're back after a week hiatus because of me having foot surgery, so we're back and at it. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from August 16th, 2024, and I'm recording this on February 13th, 2025. As always, those dates are so you know when this information is most relevant because the market is moving and changing all the time, as you will see when we look at how much these books have moved around in the last 6 months. As always, also, we're using the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Comics of the Week and the CBSI Hot Top 10 as our two lists that we use. This week we got 17 books to talk about. We do this so that we can understand what was moving in the market, what was making those books move in the market, what were people chasing and why. And then we come back 6 months later to say, okay, what's still affecting those books? Would you have been better off being patient? Should you have chased them? So we all make little better decisions about what books we chase in a moment and what books we're patient on. So without further ado, I'm going to dig into this list and see what we can learn this week. First up, we have Masters of the Universe, number 1 from 1982. This is the first titled miniseries, and we had got casting for Tila, which is what caused this book to hit the list. Back then, raw copies were averaging about 25, 9.8 going for 345. Still averaging about 25 on a raw copy now, 10 to 40, 9.8 about 250. So that's actually come down a little bit. I will say you'll see some higher sales in there mixed in. Some newsstands go like 40 to 70 and 500, even though back then they should have actually been more available, but they tend to go for more. But anyway, overall, we're going to call this steady and I'll be back. Most of the sales were on the raw side. They were basically that same kind of average. 9.8 did take a slight step back, so that's why we're going with the I'll be back as opposed to the worth it. Next, we're going to talk about Something is Killing the Children, number 1. Obviously, this was the kickoff issue of this show, or of this comic that has been very, very popular. It was early on, was optioned by Netflix, and basically back in the summer, we got images of Tinian was giving us an update saying that he was working on scripts for the show, so it's still supposedly moving forward. Raw copies back then were 325 to 525, 9.8, 600. Now raw copy of the first print, cover A, 2 to 500 for a raw. So low end's down a little bit, but basically most of the sales are right in that same range as before. 9.8, 6 to 800, which is actually a little step up. So we're going to call this steady and worth it. I will say that once upon a time, this was like a $2,000 book when this first news came out, so this book has come way back down, but it is definitely still doing pretty well and sitting kind of in that same range. We'll see once we ever get like casting news or something like that. This book will probably take off again. Next, we have Transformers number 11 as we move into covers. This is the one per store James Herron variant, this Ultra Magnus variant. Basically, we had people chasing $85 to $100 back then. Now it's a $55 to $100 raw book, 9.8, 115 to 135. So the top end of the raw copies and the low end of the 9.8s are basically the same. I was predicted this would drop back considerably. It did not. It's still got a pretty good market. It has stepped back a little bit, so we'll call steady and I'll be back because there are significant sales under that $85, but there's still a lot of sales in that 85 to 100 range. So we'll call it steady, I'll be back, as opposed to down and I'll be back. Next, we've got a couple more covers. We have the Power Fantasy number 1, the Casper Wingard, 1 per store. This one was 85 to 120 back then. Now, only 2 recent sales, one for 105 and a 9.8 for 300, right in the range. That 105 is right in the middle of the range it was before. So we're going to call it steady and worth it, but only 2 sales. So there's not a lot of movement on this book, but enough that it's, and I mean, the sales that did happen were still in the same range. So next we have the Power Fantasy number 1, the Casper Wingard Secret variant, which is very similar to the A cover with just slight differences. This one was 15 to 30 back then because the A cover is so similar. Now it's a $10 to $15 book, 9.8, 85. So this is down and I'll be back. Borderline trap on this one, which is what I had predicted. But yeah, this one it did not hold up as well as that one that was on its own. Or the the one that was a different cover as opposed to the one that's very similar to the A cover. Next, we have more covers. We have Werewolf by Night, #1, the Red Band, Jeff DeCall 1 in 50. This one was going for 85 to 125, which, about double ratio on 1 in 50. Not a great sign. Usually ends up down around ratio. Well, this one's now 30 to 40, so it's actually below ratio. 65 to 100 for 9.8, which is less than some of the sales for raw copies back then. So this is our first dumpster fire of the week, and actually, spoiler alert, our only dumpster fire this week. So we had a pretty good week in terms of performance, but yeah, we definitely had a dumpster fire on this one. Next, our last cover is Uncanny X-Men #1, the Jim Lee 1 in 50. This is when basically Marvel had used Jim Lee's old covers several times. He had basically told them not to do that anymore, and they finally got to an agreement where they could use some of his old art that was there. So that's what this cover is. It's one of these old pieces that Jim Lee had done that had never been used. This is a pretty nice road cover, going for 85 back then, which is not great for 1 in 50. And now it's a $40 to $85 book, 9.8, 75 to 100. So down and I'll be back. Still pretty good value for a 1 in 50, but definitely a slight step back. Being patient, you could definitely find some deals. Next, we had one DCU book. Basically, this is Justice League #7, the first team appearance of Argus. And James Gunn had tweeted the symbol of Argus, which is Amanda Waller's kind of organization. And yeah, so people were chasing this book. But really, this was just a bunch of sales. Raw copies back then were $3, 9.8, 75. Now it's basically $2, 9.8, 75. We'll call it steady and I'll be back. But really, there was no reason to chase this in the moment. All right, next. We move into MCU, and we had a bunch of MCU stuff. First up, we had Uncanny X-Men #251. Back on the list for the third or fourth time. I forget exactly how many times this did hit the list because of this image on the cover was a little cameo or Easter egg in the Deadpool Wolverine movie. Raw copies were $65 back then. 9.8 3 to 350. Now it's a $10 to $55 book. 9.8 is $2 to $250. So that's a trap. This book is definitely backed up. So yeah, this is one that it is definitely a book that would have been worth being patient on and getting away from the movie. The rest of these were based off basically trailers and footage that we got at D23. So first up, we had Daredevil #11, first appearance of Muse. They got some footage of Daredevil Born Again back then, causing this to hit the list. We knew he was going to be the villain. Back then, raw copies were 20 to 70, 9.8, 215. Then recently, we just got the trailer. So prior to the trailer coming out, this was actually a down in, and I'll be back. It was down just a little bit. But now it's a $50 to $90 book since the trailer, 9.8, 300. So it's an up in straight cash. So it's actually all about timing on when you buy these things. So there was a little bit of a lull between the D23 footage and our recent trailer. But now that the trailer's out, the book is actually up and doing really well. Same goes for our next book, Daredevil 14. First cover appearance of Muse, $30 back then, 9.8, 100. Now it's a $30 to $50 book, 9.8, 125 to 175. So another up and straight cash book based on that trailer driving this book back into the front of people's minds. Next, we have Daredevil 183, first battle between Daredevil and Punisher. We'd actually already seen this in the Netflix series, but Punisher is supposed to be showing up in this series as well. So that people were jumping back on this book. Raw copies back then, 20 to 30, 9.8, 183. Now raw copies are 10 to 40, 9.8, 175 to 200. So basically exactly the same as it was back then. Steady and worth it on this one. This is a classic Daredevil cover and book that people like anyway. Wasn't really up that much, just a bump in sales, and it's still setting right in the same range it kind of always sets. All right, next. More Daredevil footage driving a book. This is Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man #9, first appearance of White Tiger in a standard comic. This is another one that we have seen, a character that we've got to see in the trailer recently. Back then, it was $20 to $45, 9.8, 265. Now it's a $10 to $50 book with an outlier sale of 100. on a raw copy, 9.83 to 365. So steady and worth it on this one. Yeah, it's basically, again, this was an I'll be back until the trailer dropped, and now it's at least steady and worth it again. So based on compared to the values back last summer. Next, we had a little bit of footage from Thunderbolts, and we've since gotten that trailer as well, but that's been a little while. Century #1, first appearance of Century, we got a glimpse of him in a trailer. They apparently got glimpses of him in that footage at D23. Raw copies, $80, 9.82, 90 back then. Now, $55 to $100 book, 9.82, 75. More of the sales were under the $80 mark than over. So we'll call it steady. I'll be back. There's definitely a few deals to be had here compared to what it was back then. I only put one price for the 9.8 just because like the last 4 copies have all sold at $275. So that's been a very steady 9.8 price on this one. All right, next, last but not least, we got FF #1, the first appearance of the Future Foundation plus the first Spidey in the white suit. And basically, we got an image of Spider-Man freshman year where Spidey appeared to be in the white suit, similar to this one. That show is now out, and we know it's not related to the Future Foundation, why he's in that suit, but that was what caused people to jump on this book. It was only going for like $3, just lots of sales. 9.8, 125, and now it's a $2 to $8 book raw. So basically, yeah, as cheap as you can get it plus shipping. 9.8, 80, so that's just, I said a dumpster fire on the 9.8. Well, it only turned into a trap, but definitely a book that had been worth being patient on. All right, 2 books left, and both of those were related. Had nothing to do with D23, but did have to do with a movie that has now come and gone, which was the Kraven movie, which killed Sony's Spider villain universe finally because it bombed again. This is Web of Spider-Man #31, the start of Kraven's Last Hunt. Great book, great story. Had nothing to do with the movie, so wasn't sure why people were chasing it, but other than it was a Kraven story. Raw copies back then were $10, 9.8, 150. Now it's a $5 to $15 book, 9.8, 100 to 125. So down and I'll be back. No reason, another book that was no reason to chase. It's kind of went back to its typical value. Good book and a story worth reading, but not a book that's spec on. And then last but not least, we had Amazing Spider-Man #41, first appearance of Rhino. Raw copies back then were going for 100 all the way up to 750. 5.5 was hitting around 400. Now it's 100 to 350 on recent raw sales. I think that has more to do with the quality of raw copies that have sold recently, as opposed to like it's really taken a big step back. I think if you got a really nice copy, that 750 would be easily reached. 5.5s, last 2 sales, 312, 360. So down and I'll be back. And that goes, I looked at a couple other grades, and kind of mid grades on this book are actually down. If you get into like the high grade stuff, like a 9.4, those are actually up compared to what it was. 9.0, 9.4, 8.5, like the higher end of this book is actually up, even with the movie coming and going compared to last summer. But a lot of that mid grade stuff that most people can afford has all taken a slight step back following the movie. So down and I'll be back on that range. But so that is this week's list. I want to thank you guys for watching, putting up with me being upstairs for a little bit longer. Sorry I missed last week, but we were back at it, and we will catch you next time. Later.